Welcome back to another episode of The Divine Guide, where we're exploring early Imamism and examining the original teachings of the 12 Imams through the groundbreaking work of Amir Moezzi. Today, we continue our exploration of the most fundamental concept in early Imami doctrine, the concept of aql. In our previous episodes, we traced the evolution of aql from its pre Islamic meaning as simple good sense to its transformation in the Quran and its multidimensional significance in early Imamism. Today, we will dive deeper and examine how it functions as a cosmic entity, and we will also discuss how its meaning evolved and became distorted over time, and why understanding the original concept is crucial for grasping the authentic teachings of the Imams. Let's start with the hadith from Al-Kafi, where Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq provides us with a profound description of aql's central role in creation. It states, "Indeed, the beginning of all things, their origin, their strength, and their foundation, is that aql without which one can benefit from nothing, which Allah created it to adorn His creatures and is a light for them. So through aql, the servants came to know their Creator and that they are created beings, and that He is the manager of their affairs, and that they are the ones managed, and that He is everlasting while they are perishing. And through it, they came to know the good from the reprehensible, and that darkness is in ignorance, and that light is in knowledge." This statement is actually remarkable in its breadth. Aql serves as a foundation for everything in existence, and it adorns and illuminates creation. We also note that aql can independently recognize certain foundational truths about the Creator. Independently here means without the help of revelation. The hadith continues, "And he came to know through his aql that his Creator has things he loves and things he dislikes, and that he has obedience and he has disobedience." So again, aql can also independently recognize general concepts of light and darkness, likes and dislikes, obedience and disobedience, but then it hits a wall. The same hadith continues, "But he did not find his aql guiding him to the specifics of that. And he came to know that access to that cannot be reached except through ilm and seeking it, and that he cannot benefit from his aql if he does not attain that through his ilm. Therefore, it became obligatory upon the reasonable person, the aql, to seek ilm and adab, without which there is no foundation for him." The limitation of aql is emphasized in the phrase about specifics. So, while reason can establish general principles, it cannot determine the particular details of what specifically constitutes obedience and disobedience, what acts God loves or dislikes, or how to worship Him properly. Therefore, to know these specifics, one must turn to ilm, meaning the revealed knowledge transmitted through prophets, the scripture, and the prophetic tradition. Aql alone, despite its ability to recognize the general truths about God and morality, remains incomplete without the guidance of revelation. The two work together, aql and revelation. Aql leads one to recognize the need for revelation, and revelation provides the details that aql cannot access independently. Now, here's where things get particularly interesting. Amir Moezzi reveals a crucial distinction between two different concepts of aql and contrasts the two different understandings. First, we have what we might call the original akal or the hiero-intelligence. This is the faculty that perceives both the rational and the supra-rational. And it's not just about logical thinking, it's a cosmic entity, a divine gift that serves as our connection to the divine. Second, we have the theological akal, the concept that emerged later among religious scholars. And this version of akal is more limited, focusing primarily on dialectical reasoning and logical argumentation. And let me explain what these two terms mean. Dialectical reasoning refers to the method of arriving at truth through rational discourse, through debate, argumentation, and the systematic examination of opposing viewpoints. And logical argumentation in this context means the use of formal logic, syllogisms, and rational proofs to establish divine or religious truths. Amir Moezzi's point is that the early Imams of Ahlul Bayt had a much richer and a more mystical understanding of Aql. And for them, it was not merely a tool for debate or logical proof, but was more expansive than that. And while it encompasses the rational faculties, it transcends them. And it's not merely the organ of the rational, but also the faculty for perceiving the supra-rational, the mystical insights, the divine realities, spiritual truths that lie beyond the reach of logical reasoning alone. The later theological akal reduced this expansive spiritual concept to a narrow intellectual tool used mainly in kalam, theological discourse, and debates. So the evolution that Amir Moezzi describes is from the definition of akal as a holistic, spiritual, intellectual faculty to a more restricted, rationalistic instrument for simply theological discourse and disputation. This transformation in the meaning of akal didn't happen by accident. And one of Moezzi's most significant contributions is tracing how the meaning of akal shifted over time. A shift that had profound implications for how Imamism itself was understood and practiced. This semantic slide or the transformation began around the 3rd century of the Islamic calendar under the influence of Aristotelian texts being translated into Arabic and the rise of dialectical methodology in the Islamic theological circles, particularly from the Mu'tazilite school. Remember from the previous episode when we talked about the meaning of akal in pre-Islamic Arabia? It's crucial to note that even with this new rationalist evolution, akal never completely reverted all the way back to its pre-Islamic meaning. It still remains and is used exclusively in religious contexts, but its nature and function have been distorted and reinterpreted in increasingly rationalistic terms. Or simply said, what Amir Moezzi claims is that the meaning of akal, unfortunately, has evolved into something that neither reflects the pre-Islamic origin nor remains faithful to the way that the Imams had described it to be. This semantic shift had particularly significant consequences within the Imami circles. Sheikh al-Mufid passed away in 413 Hijri, less than 100 years after the 12th Imam's disappearance. And he appears to be the first major Imami theologian to ground his theological arguments in the new conception of aql as dialectical and logical reasoning. What's fascinating is that Although Sheikh Mufid maintained the Imam's definitions of Aql in theory, but in practice he adopted the Mu'tazilite usage to engage with them in theological debates. He felt compelled to employ their conceptual framework to be able to participate effectively in the intellectual discourse of his time. And this transformation continued with his disciple, Sharif al-Murtada. Al-Murtada was also a student of the renowned Mu'tazilite thinker Abdul Jabbar. And in al-Murtada's work, Aql appears completely divested of its early meaning, becoming simply a synonym for istidlal, reasoning, and a faculty of dialectical speculation. The intellectual influence of these two thinkers was so profound that their rationalist approach became the dominant view within Imamism, and a perspective that continues to the present day. The new concept of Aql effectively supplanted the earlier one, leaving between them only what Moezzi calls a homonymous relationship that is open to confusion. And this was no minor shift. It represented a fundamental reorientation of how Imami doctrine was understood and approached. And this confusion between the understanding and the definition of Aql had serious consequences. Because the Aql, as defined by the later Islamic scholars as dialectical reasoning, operates at a very different epistemological level. And naturally, it rejects the non-rational. And when it replaces the definition of the Imam, where the Aql is like a hiero-intelligence as the primary approach to their teachings, what Amir Moezzi says is that the religious consciousness itself is modified. Reasoning, even religious reasoning, cannot perceive or accept the intuitive and the mystical resonance with the miraculous that characterizes early Imamism. The consequences of this confusion became apparent in the criticisms leveled by the later rationalist Imami theologians against earlier tradition-bearer, the scholars that were faithful to the hadith, to the traditions. Al-Mufid criticized his master Sheikh Saduq Ibn Babawayh in the name of reason. al-Sharif al-Murtada went further, censuring Kulaini and others for including in their compilations traditions that appeared absurd in the light of reason. Similarly, Sheikh Tusi omitted from his compilation on the hidden Imam all traditions of an esoteric or occult nature. And what's particularly striking is that these theologians believed they were acting in accordance with the Imam's teachings. Because of the homonymy, meaning the same word now carrying a totally different meaning, they believed they were working in the name of the Aql so praised by the Imams, when in fact they were applying a fundamentally different concept. Ironically, when they believed they were following the Imam's guidance about using Aql, they were actually working against the original intention of the Imams. More troubling still, they directed their censure and disapproval towards those very scholars who had faithfully preserved and who had maintained fidelity to the authentic understanding of Aql, as transmitted by the Imams themselves. As Moezzi pointedly observes, the teachings of the Imams were being censured at the same time that their directives were believed to be followed. This case study of Aql has profound methodological implications for the study of early Imamism. It demonstrates the necessity of paying careful attention to technical terms in early Imami texts. And these terms must first be identified as technical terms, which isn't always obvious. Because given our modern mental habits, common terms that we hear frequently in the Islamic lectures, like Momin, Iman, Ilm, Qalb, and even Shia, might seem straightforward at first, when they actually carried very specific technical meanings in early Imami discourse. Now, once identified, these terms must be examined through a critical reading of all textual references situated within the broader framework of the doctrinal history of early Imamism. Without this historical perspective, semantic evolutions might go unnoticed, and different phases of doctrine might be conflated or confused. The early concept of akal reveals the specific lens through which the Imams intended their teachings to be approached, to be perceived and understood. It was not primarily through logical argumentation or rational analysis, but through a spiritualized intelligence that could resonate with not just rational, supra-rational truths. And it was precisely by attributing to akal the later meaning of dialectical reasoning that Imamism has now come to be viewed as a rational doctrine, leading to numerous confusions and contradictions in how the tradition was understood. And this is why Moezzi places akal at the beginning of his study as an essential interpretive key for approaching the authentic teachings of the Imams. As we conclude this episode, we can see why understanding the original concept of akal is so crucial for grasping the authentic teachings of the Imams. And this isn't merely a semantic quibble or a matter of academic interest. It fundamentally shapes how we approach, how we interpret and engage with the entire corpus of our early Imami tradition. The akal praised by the Imams wasn't simply logical reasoning, but a spiritual faculty that could apprehend divine realities. It was both a cosmic entity, the first creation of God, and an inner light that allowed believers to recognize truth, particularly the truth embodied in the Imams themselves. The semantic evolution of this term and its replacement with a more rationalistic conception represents one of the most significant transformations in the history of Imamism. And by recognizing this shift, we can better distinguish between the original teachings of the historical Imams and later interpretations, gaining a clearer picture of early Imami doctrine in its authentic form. In our next episode, we will continue exploring key concepts in early Imamism, building on this foundation to develop a more comprehensive understanding of the Imam's original teachings. Until then, thank you for joining me on this journey through the Divine Guide. Ma salam.